July is almost up. We have a new set in Edge of Eternities coming out in about 24 hours from this video, and Pioneer is still alive and kicking on Magic the Gathering Online. I wanted to go back from the beginning of the month of July and recap how the Pioneer metagame has looked in the Winners metagame, which of course means we're going to be looking at challenges, we're going to be looking at showcases if they've occurred, as well as the championship event that wound up happening about halfway through the month. We're going to be digging into what was popular, what was winning, and what was piquing our interests as far as innovation in the format goes. Now, these are all going to be results gathered from mtgdex.net and sorted and cleaned through the data by myself. So if there's something that looks a little out of line, I may have changed a couple of the classifications, or I may have made sure that things kind of add up a little bit differently. If there's a deck that is named something different than what you may colloquially call it, well, that's just what MTGDex has called it. If it didn't have a name, I gave it an archetype name. So without further ado, let's take a look at what the Winners metagame in Magic the Gathering Online has looked like in the month of July. It's actually kind of funny if you think about how Pioneer has shaped up over the last month or so, and then think about like the last time it was an RCQ format. We're like a mono green devotion away from the top decks still kind of being the top decks in the format. You have your Izzet Phoenix, your Rakdos Demons, your Selesnya Angels, and your Greasefang deck, although the cards and the colors have changed a little bit. And of course at the top we have the mono red aggro deck, with the Mice package still being one of the strongest or at least most popular things to do in the Magic the Gathering Online Pioneer metagame, with 27.9% of that metagame share for the Winners metagame. But as you go down the rest of the list, you can of course see that Phoenix is still representing a 12.3% metagame share with 114 decks. Rakdos Demons actually popping back up into third place with 10.6% share of the metagame, Selesnya Angel with 7.5%, and then the Orzhov version of the Greasefang deck, which we looked at in the last recap video, with a 4.1% share of that metagame and 38 total decks played. Now, we have a conglomeration of Lotus Field decks, both the traditional 4 to 5 color and the Izzet deck. Although they are a little bit different, we've kind of combined them in here just because they do combo off and play in a very similar way, with casting a bunch of spells and finding a game-ending combo. 4% of the metagame share here with 37 different decks, as well as the Azorius Control deck, the first control deck on the list here, just playing the standard blue-white counter spells and interaction package, also 4% of the metagame with the same share of decks as the Lotus Field combo deck. Boros Hammer Time, which was a highlight from our last video as well, has surged in popularity and now finds 35 different decks with 3.8% of the metagame, as well as that Simic Scapeshift Mill deck picking up in popularity from the last video, 3.6% of the metagame with 33 decks in total. Mono Black version of the Demons deck has fallen in popularity from the last couple of months with only 25 decks and a 2.7% share of the metagame, while Izzet Creativity has picked up a little bit with 15 total decks and 1.6% share of the metagame. Now, as you look down the rest of the list, you will see a couple of familiar faces like the Jund Sack and Golgari food variants. Mono Green Devotion is much further down the list, as is the Dimir Rogue / Ninjas list, a couple different versions of Prowess and Sacrifice, as well as a couple other different kinds of combo decks such as Quintorius combo and the Izzet Rona combo, and then a bunch of different decks like the Humans decks popping up again in the format. But if you want to look at what's winning the most and not just what is being played the most, it does look a little bit different when you take away the amount of decks needed to be at the top of this list. One of those Humans decks, the Mono White variety, is actually the most winning deck of the Magic the Gathering Online Winners metagame for July, with a 31-14 record, putting it at almost a 69% win rate. Nice. Meanwhile, the Izzet Rona combo deck, which is using both Vivi and Rona in addition to the Helix and Mox Ember combo, is sitting at a 66.7% win rate, tied with two other decks up here. The Azorius Lotus Field deck, which is a blue-white control deck that is using Discontinuity to stop that trigger and then, play a control game with a mana advantage, as well as a straight-up Izzet Prowess deck, which is a little bit different than the Rona combo deck and the Phoenix deck, looking to be a little bit more aggressive with its spell slinging. Both of those decks are sitting at 66.7% win rate as well. The Jund Sacrifice deck, although it didn't have as much of a presence as it used to have, is still one of the most winning of the more popular archetypes. There are 94 total matches played in the month of July so far, with a 66% win rate overall. Now, the mono black Cecil deck, which if you play other Eternal formats like Modern, can be looked at as the mono black Death Shadow variant, is sitting here with a 65% win rate and enticing me to play a league with it. The Golgari food variants of the deck at a 64.1% win rate with 92 total matches played, just behind the Jund Sacrifice deck, and the Simic Scapeshift Mill combo, 220 total matches played with a 63.2% win rate overall, and then another version of a combo deck right below it, Lotus Field combo, all the variations, 62.2% total win rate with 246 matches played on MTGO. Now, going down the list, you can see a couple of other decks sitting here at 60% or higher in the winners metagame. Martyr Greasefang, the Izzet Creativity decks we talked about before, a resurgence of Green Devotion, and then the other colors of Greasefang, Demons. We have Azorius Spirits picking up a 60% win rate, as well as the Jund Citadel deck, which is playing off the top of its deck with Bolas's Citadel, sitting there at a 60% win rate as well. But as you go a little bit further down the list, you start to find some of the more popular decks in the room. Izzet Phoenix, for example, has fallen off on win rate a little bit compared to the last pop in with the metagame look in the beginning of July. It's sitting at below a 60% win rate, which is like not bad at all, but has fallen from that top echelon of one of the most winning decks in the format. We also have Red Deck Wins, or the mono red aggro deck with the mouse package, sitting at 58.8% win rate. So it is now hot on the heels of Phoenix, despite being the most popular deck with more than double the amount of matches of Phoenix, which is the second most popular deck being played. We also see the mono black Demons deck down here at 57.8% win rate, which is behind the Rakdos variant. So Rakdos is picking up in popularity again, as well as Gruul Prowess, which seems to be the prowess variant of choice here with a 57.4% win rate overall. Now, the Selesnya Angels deck, which was kind of catered towards fighting against the mono red and some of the Phoenix decks, is actually on the second column over here with 28th altogether in win rate with 57.1% in the winners metagame. Now, that doesn't mean that the deck is falling off or anything. It's just the fact that there are so many other decks that can go above what the Angels deck is doing, like the Simic Scapeshift Mill combo or the Lotus Field combo decks, that just absolutely eat up the fact that the Angels deck is relying on having a high life total, and they can just completely ignore it to win the game. Boros Hammer Time is sitting just below that, so that version of the deck is definitely picking up steam. And as we go down, we see some other fan favorites with not too many copies of the decks in the winners metagame, but we also start to find some of these decks with an overall below 50% win rate, which means that even though people are playing the deck, it's not putting up results. Specifically, the Izzet and Soul Artifact deck and the Abzan version of Greasefang, as well as the Rakdos version of Sacrifice. These are definitely fan favorite decks and older archetypes that just don't seem to be holding a candle to some of the new iterations that are being played in the format. So if you're a pilot and a favorite of one of these decks, you may want to look on the left-hand column for a very similar style of deck, but a different package of colors or spells being played. So I'm going to start off by talking about one of the decks that has me very excited to play it, which is the mono black Cecil deck. Now, this hits a couple of different checkboxes for me. The first off being a mono black deck, the second off being my favorite Final Fantasy character, and the third thing is I was kind of looking for a version of this deck that could potentially work in Pioneer for a long time, basically the mono black aggro kind of archetype, and seeing how I can kind of shape and build it, especially since Smuggler's Copter unbanned, which was one of the more powerful players in the version of the deck before that card got banned. Well, this time around, it looks like that the pilot MJ23, which is the version of the list I want to highlight, which top forward a Pioneer challenge back on July 17th, has kind of found the secret sauce, which is legendary creatures. Now, Cecil Dark Knight, obviously the namesake of the deck, is a legendary creature, but so is Tiny Bones the Pickpocket, as well as Gix Yawgmoth Crater. Now these 3 different legends combine for 12 total copies, which means that Mox Amber has a higher % chance of being online early in the game. That means that not only can you play your 1-drop at the beginning of the game, but then you can hold up that crucial fatal push or that key Thoughtseize and do both in the same turn, which is something that the mono black decks usually struggle with, either playing multiple spells a turn or being ahead of the curve so that they have a way to interact with some of these more problematic permanents like enchantments and artifacts. Now, because of that extra little push, you can then play Gix on turn 2 and then swing in with Cecil, take an extra damage to draw a card, and then also just get closer towards flipping your Cecil. Now, Dark Confidant being released in Standard is a perfect addition to the deck, as it gives it a little additional card advantage reach, as well as drains your life total just enough so that Cecil can flip a little bit faster. Now, we don't have anything in the main deck or sideboard that is higher than 3 converted mana cost, so you're not going to be in danger of really losing the game to your own Bob unless you're already taking a lot of damage from an aggro deck, in which case you're probably sideboarding the Bobs out. However, the rest of the deck does run a bit more of an interactive or ground stall package. We have the Deep Cavern Bats as a 4-of. That's going to be your main way to deal with problematic spells from your opponents. Then we also have 3 copies of Gifted Aetherborn in the main deck version of this one, and that's going to basically be your stall tactic against the aggro decks and be something that they have to answer while you are continuing to develop your more important creatures. Now, of course, you have a plethora of removal, you have the 4 copies of Mox Amber, and you are a more aggressive style deck, so we're only running 20 lands and 4 copies of Mutavault and 2 copies of Hive of the Eye Tyrant as well. So you're trying to get as aggressive as possible and then just kind of get your opponent low enough, as well as yourself, where you flip your Cecil, you can attack him with everything but Cecil has indestructible, and you're able to kind of win the game that way. Now, the one thing that this version of the deck does not have is more than 1 copy of Smuggler's Copter in the main deck. So I'm wondering if that is going to be something that we want to up a little bit after playing around with the deck a little bit, although it looks like you kind of have to cut into the Gifted Aetherborns or Deep Cavern Bats to do so, because you don't want to go lower than 12 legends for your Mox Amber. The sideboard does wind up having a plethora of mono black cards, including things like 4 copies of Duress, 2 copies of Withering Torment as your answer to enchantments that have resolved, and then 4 copies of Unholy Annex Ritual Chamber, which I'm assuming are what you swap out for Dark Confidant in some of these matchups, because I don't know if you want to be doming yourself for 8 all of the time, and the only demon you actually have are your Mutavaults or the Resolved Ritual Chamber side of things. All right, let's talk Rona-based combo decks, because I was a fan of the old Jeskai Ascendancy combo. I have definitely been a fan of the mono blue version of the Rona combo deck, and now there is an Izzet version, which, although it is kind of fighting for space alongside the normal spells and prowess versions of the decks, is making its own impact on the Pioneer format and may wind up being the premier creature-based combo deck. So Rona, Herald of the Invasion, pairs perfectly with Retraction Helix and Mox Amber. Now, if you wind up playing your Rona, you know that it will wind up untapping whenever you cast a legendary spell. So if you cast a Mox Amber, it is going to untap your Rona. Now, Retraction Helix means you tap your Rona and you can bounce a permanent to its owner's hand. So as long as you have a Retraction Helix Rona, you can bounce your Mox Amber and use that for mana and bounce your Amber and Rona back and forth because it's going to untap every single time. And then you wind up having a ton of spells being cast, and normally you would wind up pumping things up with like a Jeskai Ascendancy in order to do that. However, this time around, we have Kori Steelcutter. We don't need Jeskai Ascendancy anymore. Just 1 Kori Steelcutter will make a Monk token the second time or actually the first time you cast your Mox Amber, which will be your second spell of the turn, in addition to your Retraction Helix. And then you can just cast spells over and over and over again, and that's going to pump the thing up to be a large trample haste creature. So you could potentially just win the game. However, if that's not going to be the way you win the game, then you can cast Vivi, because Vivi is going to trigger and put a +1/+1 counter on itself and deal 1 damage to each opponent whenever you cast that Mox Amber. So there's a ton of damage that can be dealt right there, even without combat. And if for some reason your opponent is playing angels and has way too much life that you've actually lost count of it, you can just use Vivi to make an infinite amount of mana basically after that to cast anything else in your deck. You're going to kill the Angel's opponent. If they have no interaction to remove your Rona and your Mox Amber, or your Vivi, you'll deal basically an infinite amount of damage. However, there are backups to this. You have Valley Floodcaller, which says that you can cast your non-creature spells as though it had flash, so you can even Vivi combo somebody on their turn. But whenever you cast a non-creature spell, birds, frogs, otters, rats you control will get +1/+1 till end of turn and untap them. So in essence, your Valley Floodcaller is an additional copy of Rona if you are to Retraction Helix your Valley Floodcaller. Now, there are a couple of copies of Mox Jasper in this list, and even though there are no dragons in sight, there are 4 copies of Mutavault, which means Mox Jasper is just additional copies of Mox Amber in this list. So the rest of the deck are ways to find your combo pieces, sleight of hand, stock up, and then Seagate Restoration. Because you're going to have a lot of mana, you can just draw basically 7 cards or however many cards you have in your hand. And then there's a couple copies of Magic Damper from Final Fantasy, which is going to give your creature +1/+1 and hexproof, and most importantly, it's going to untap it in case you need to use it to start a combo altogether. You have Storm Chaser's talents as well, so you can buy back some of your combo pieces or make additional prowess threats for when you're actually popping off to kill somebody. Now, that's basically the deck in a nutshell. The sideboard has some funny cards here, like Kelorana, if I'm saying that correct, the Coral Tyrant, which is a 0/8 wall for 2 mana so that you don't just die to the mono red decks while you're attempting to find your combo and combo off. And then you have Ral Crackling Wit in the sideboard, which basically says whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you put a loyalty counter on it. And then the -10 ability is you get 3 cards to draw, and you get an emblem with instants and sorcery spells you cast have Storm. So in case you needed an infinite amount of spell casts from something, you can do that with Ral as well. So this is going to be a very difficult to interact with creature combo deck where there's a lot of redundancy in the ways that you can kill somebody, and it's picking up steam in Pioneer, and like I said, it might be the go-to combo deck for combo enthusiasts. This one might wind up being a little bit of a shorter overview because Mono White Humans hasn't gotten any additional cards since Veteran Survivor was printed in Duskmourn, but is still putting up really good results just based on the fact that it attacks the metagame in a very interesting way. Now, Mono White Humans in general was a very good deck when control, combo, and spell slinging decks like Phoenix were at the top of the metagame. So even though mono red kind of bucks that trend a little bit, the mono white deck is still preying on a bunch of the decks that you can see below the mono red aggro deck in the metagame share. So you still wind up having Thalia, Guardian of Thraben, as your main kind of hate piece, as well as the central focus of this deck that really holds it together in those matchups that we just talked about, where it's advantageous in. You also wind up having Coppercoat Vanguard, which gives not only your humans +1/+0, but it gives them Ward 1, which means against the Rakdos mid-range decks, their Fatal Pushes cost 2, their Go for the Throats cost 3, and they really need to find sweepers or bust because they're not going to be able to multi-spell to clear your board the way they can against the mono red decks. Now, Warden of the Inner Sky was a slightly older edition that kind of fell back and forth in and out of favor in the list, but is still continuing to be here as something that will grow itself, as well as fix your draws with the Scry ability, so you are able to set yourself up for a larger swing turn by just pumping a turn or two into the Warden itself to build itself up and fix your draw for the next turn or so. Now, Adeline Resplendent Cathar is still the go-to kind of win condition for the deck. It's going to have power equal to the number of creatures you control, and whenever you attack, you're going to get an additional 1/1 white human creature token that is tapped and attacking. So that's going to be your advantage of going a little bit wide, and then that's also going to wind up helping out for some of the other cards that you're playing with, like the Coppercoat Vanguard that makes them 2/1s, and it's going to give Adeline at least 1 power in addition to that. So you still wind up having having this strategy that is very focused on the human creature type can go wide, but can also build itself up a little bit taller thanks to Warden of the Inner Sky. In the sideboard, you do have more hate pieces for some of those more combo and control-y style decks. You have 4 copies of Wedding Announcement, which make human creature tokens. It's very difficult to interact with when you're suddenly going from 34 creatures to 4 copies of an Anthem effect enchantment. You have 4 copies of Elite Spellbinder in the sideboard as well, which is going to wind up ripping cards out of the mid-range and combo decks' hands, and you wind up having just Rest in Peace to kind of put the nail in the coffin against the graveyard-based decks, and Ossification, which is a very powerful sort of removal spell, which can target a creature or planeswalker and just get rid of it pretty much until they get rid of one of your planes, which is not usually going to happen. Now let's talk about Golgari Food, because while it is the same deck as Golgari Sacrifice, pilots have kind of coincided on what the list is going to look like throughout the month of July and kind of arrived towards the end of the month on what a really solid list looks like. So you will see a lot of similarities towards what was being played at the beginning of July with the new Final Fantasy cards, specifically Sephiroth Fabled Soldier. However, I didn't sort it out entirely because MTG decks had them listed as different things at different points in time. So I just kept it that way. And because of that, the deck has a slightly higher win rate, about 2% in my current rankings than it does when you combined all the archetypes. So it's not super different. However, the list have finally solidified on just basically a 17 creature package in addition to the rest of the spells that you're going to see on your screen. Now, this is just the same Cauldron Familiar, Yigra Eater of All combo deck where you're going to try to Scavenger's Talent, get your 2 cats in your graveyard, Yigra everything back, and just kill your opponent by draining them infinitely. Now, Sephiroth Fabled Soldier adds a different angle of attack. Normally, the Golgari lists don't have a Mayhem Devil type effect, so Sephiroth is going to slot into that one very well because every single time your creature dies, you are going to be able to drain your opponent for 1 additional damage, which means that your Cauldron Familiar loops with just Witch's Oven are a lot deadlier. It also means that being able to Deadly Dispute away a Vine Reap Mentor or something along those lines is going to net you cards, damage, and being able to create an additional food token to bring your cats back, and a treasure token as well. So the deck has really solidified around this core lineup here. Even the sideboard has kind of solidified a bit, getting rid of the weird one of Massacre Girls and things along those lines, and solidifying into something that just has a bunch of interaction and removal, as well as just graveyard hate for the opposing graveyard-based synergy decks. One interesting thing here from Pilot ALMTG, however, is the main deck copies of Paw Patch Formation, mainly to draw a card and create a food token to keep your loops going or keep bringing back your cats and like your gooses go online. This is an interesting main deck normal sideboard card that has an interesting use in this specific version of the deck that was something that wasn't really solidified until the last couple of challenges and stuff were being played this month. Now, the last list here is a little bit more of a fun one than a necessarily good one here, as Mr. Aquilian 1990 went 2-4 in a Pioneer Challenge with a deck that I'm calling mostly green Landfall, although it has Golgari in it as well. Now, this is a little bit different than some of the lower to the ground aggressive decks, as well as different than like the Tifa decks you're seeing in Standard. This is a Dread Presence deck, and finding Dread Presence is the way this deck is normally going to kill somebody. So you are not only going to be trying to find your Dread Presence, but you're going to be able to then try to make as many land drops as possible, as well as using Landfall to your advantage. Elvish Reclaimer is a way to sack a land to get an additional land drop. Lotus Cobra will turn your additional land drops into mana. There are a couple copies of Fabled Passage as well as a New Capenna fetch lands in this list that will get you 2 landfall triggers, and then Traveling Chocobo will let you play lands from the top of your deck as well as double any of the ETB effects that a land or bird you control entering the battlefield will do, which means it'll double those Lotus Cobras and double the Dread Presence. Now, Insidious Fungus is a 4 in this list, which is just going to let you basically growth spiral by sacrificing it, and that will put an additional land into play. Nissa Resurgent Animist is going to be able to take advantage of the landfall triggers as well, in addition to looking to find an elemental or another elf, so you're going to be able to find yourself Elvish Reclaimers, but then you also have 2 copies of Ashaya, Soul of the Wild. Now this 5-drop, which is not only going to be as powerful and as tough as the number of lands you control, will also turn all of your creatures into forests. So that means that whenever you play a creature with all these extra mana landfall that you get from your Lotus Cobra and your Nissa, it's going to trigger your Dread Presence, which if you have a Traveling Chocobo is going to double. So all in all, this is a very all-in combo deck on having a Dread Presence. You even have copies of Green Sun's Twilight, which means you're going to be able to look at the top X+1 cards of your library and find a creature, and if X is 5 or more, you're going to be able to put it onto the battlefield instead of just putting it into your hand. So it's kind of like a singleton thing of collected company for the top of your deck. Now I'm wondering if you want to play some of the more like Court of Calling type effects in this list as well, but Mr. Aquilian has it figured out so far. The sideboard is basically a bunch of hate cards, Damping Spheres, Unlicensed Hearse, Assassin's Trophy, Abrupt Decay, and Leyline of the Void. So if you're playing around with Landfall and you want to find a way to kill your opponent, you could wind up going for this deck that is specifically playing Dread Presence, although I think that you may want to find a couple of copies of Iridescent Vine Lasher or something else to be backup win conditions in addition to just the Dread Presence. That's all that Magic the Gathering Online wrote for the month of July. Are there any lists that you are very interested in, or are there lists that you think could get spiced up a little bit for some of the Edge of Eternities cards that are going to be coming out tomorrow at this point? It's Monday the 28th, and I believe it's legal on Moto on the Tuesday the 29th. So are there any new cards you think will slot into these lists, or lists that may be a little bit more powerful thanks to some of those Edge of Eternity cards that are coming out? Let me know in the comments down below what you think is going to pop up in Pioneer, and while you're down there, give the video a thumbs up if you like this recap on the Moto metagame and want to see more videos just like this. Now, if you are so monetarily inclined, you could also click the join button down below my video to become one of my members. Members get specific membership perks such as Discord access, early access to all of my content, specifically member-only posts of pictures, videos, or just written content that I've come up with, in addition to specific deck lists that I may be kind of tutoring around with. Also, if you're in Discord from the membership access, you can shoot me over your list and get personal deck texts and stuff like that as well. So if you would like to, just click join down below underneath the video or on my channel's main homepage to show your devotion. Now, one way to stay in contact with me is to just tap that subscribe button down there so you can stay up to date when I release my latest deck text, metagame analysis, and just in general, Magic the Gathering content. See you on the edge.